Good morning, everybody. I'm sorry I have to join you this way via video, but I have an assignment downtown at the Washington Post at 8:30 in the morning. It's a panel discussion that I've got to cover involving a Medal of Honor winner from Buffalo, so it's really something that I can't miss. I will, however, have some time here first via video to talk to you about enterprise stories. First, let me turn your attention to the email I sent to you this morning. That email spells out not only a little bit more about your enterprise story, your final project, but just our deadlines in the next few weeks. I've changed things just a little bit, excuse me, in hopes of making things easier for you. For example, I've included an option whereby you can actually send to me a draft of your enterprise story a week ahead of time. I will review it, get it back to you 2 days later. I won't grade that version, I'll grade the final version. So doing this will actually, I think, make it a lot easier for you guys to get a good grade. So please consider that, even though it may mean you got to do a little work over Thanksgiving break, okay? Let me tell you more in depth, though, what enterprise stories are. In essence, they are stories that take a deeper look at something. It's not something that you would churn out in a day. It's not a hard news story. It's a story that includes multiple sources and sometimes may take multiple days or weeks or even months to complete. Now, we've already looked at a great range of stories that are our enterprise stories. Any of the main stories in my Burma project, my project on the refugees, those would be enterprise stories. The two long Jessica Contreras stories that we looked at in depth, those would be enterprise stories as well. And investigative stories are also considered enterprise stories. Now, I'm going to talk a lot more about investigative reporting in a week or two, so I'm not going to cover that very much today. But I'll just say that, really, enterprise stories run a wide gamut. They range from what we traditionally call Sunday stories, which are longer stories that would appear in the Sunday paper that can be produced in a couple of days, to series that could take more than a year. All right? Now, the first thing you have to decide, though, is it worth the time? Is it worth your time? Is it worth your reader's time to produce this kind of really in-depth journalism? And to decide whether that story is worth pursuing, here are just a few tips. First of all, ask yourself, how new is this? All right? Is the topic fresh? If it's something that's been written over and over and over again by others, it's probably not worthy to be an enterprise story done by you. Okay? Is it really important? You're going to have to spend a lot of time on an enterprise story, and so are your readers, and they're only going to do it if that story is important. Similarly, they're only going to do it if it's really interesting. So please make sure before you decide to go forward with one of these more in-depth stories that you know for sure that it's going to be interesting and important. Also ask yourself, is the daily news coverage of this issue enough? Have we beaten this story to death? Or is there room for more? If there's room for more, if there's room for a closer, in-depth look at a situation, then by all means, it's probably worth it. But never start an enterprise story on your own. You always need to talk to your editor. You always need to involve other people at your publication or at your website to make sure that everybody agrees that this is really worth it. So you always have to talk this over with your editor before you do anything, including even drawing up a proposal. Now, you do have to draw up a proposal. You're going to have to do that for me, for your final project, and you're going to have to do that for really any enterprise story that you ever do. Basically, what you'll do is write it up and email it to your editor, him or her, all right? And this is what a proposal should include. It should include an explanation of why you're doing the story, why you think it's a story, a list of sources that you would reach out to and try to talk to for the story. You also might want to include the kind of research, the kind of data that you would be including. Generally speaking, for most enterprise stories, you're going to need a minimum of 4 sources. That's also true for your final project. 4 sources, either live sources or pieces of data information, sources of information. But you need a minimum of 4 for your final project. All right. You need a proposed timeline, how long you think it will take to finish reporting the story and when you think you can finish it. And then finally, any potential roadblocks that could slow you down. All right. Once you do that proposal, once your editor approves, then you have to come up with a game plan. You have to think about the information that you're going to need, the documents that you're going to need to see, and make a plan to go get them. You may have to simply request them, you may have to find them online, or you may have to file a Freedom of Information Act request, which we're going to be talking about shortly in one of our future sessions here. You also need to make a list of people that you're going to need to speak with. All right? And you also need to meet with your editors to plan a multimedia approach to the story. You have to ask yourselves, what kind of photos are we going to have? What kind of graphics are we going to have? Are we going to include a video element? What precisely are we going to try to do here, right? Now, in terms of the reporting, you're probably going to have to fit it in with everything else you're doing, right? You're a busy reporter. We're all overburdened these days. So you're going to have daily stories that you're producing while you're producing an enterprise story. How do you do that? Well, you don't let it stop you. You just go at it, basically. What I often do is I'll make a phone list in the morning of everybody that I'm going to call that day. Very often it'll be 2 or 3 people for a daily story, 2 or 3 people for my weekend story, for my enterprise story for that week. My general rule is I don't put out more than 6 phone calls at any one time, because I'm afraid that if I do, all these people are going to start calling me back at once. So I try to limit it to 6, but I do put out calls both on daily stories and enterprise stories at the same time. Now, how do you balance it all? Well, obviously your daily story has to take precedence, and you have to make sure you budget your time so you finish your daily story on time. But you're going to have to fit in the enterprise work at the same time. Here's a couple tricks to make that easier. When you're going to work on an enterprise story, create a folder in your computer just for that story. Keep all your work for that story in that folder, all right? Any documents, any notes that you type up, etc. You can also create folders in Otter and store all your interviews in there if you're doing your interviews on Otter. If you are not using Otter, what I would really suggest is that you type up your notes as soon as you finish an interview. The reason for that is an enterprise story might take days, weeks. Your notes aren't going to be as fresh for you weeks from now as they are that very day. You might remember gaps that you didn't write down that you really want to put in there. So write them up as soon as you can, okay? Now, how do you know when you're done? How do you know that you've done all the reporting that you need to do? It's actually fairly simple. First of all, you ask yourself, are there any questions about this that I'm still curious about? Have I gotten every side of the story? Am I being fair by getting every side of the story? Is the story balanced in every way? Did you take into account the idea of demographic balance? Do you have roughly equal numbers of men and women in the story? Are your sources diverse in terms of age and race? Do they reflect the demographic mix of the community you cover? All of those things are very important too. And then lastly, you have to talk to your editor, your graphics person, your social media person, your photo editor to see if all the art that you need for the story is done and together. Now, writing. First thing you do, of course, is pick a story format. Will it be the Wall Street Journal format? Is it a narrative? Is it one of those other formats we discussed? Pick it out, and then you do an outline. The outline is absolutely necessary. You're going to get lost on a story this long unless you do an outline, all right? Now, if you've done enough reporting, it may be that you have a great idea already for both the lead and the ending. But if you get stuck on writing the lead or the intro section, move on. Write the other sections of the story. Again, writing them as stories within a story, as we discussed, with each section having a lead and a kicker at the end. I usually try to devote a full day to writing an enterprise story, but also balance it so that I can leave the story sit overnight and read it again the next morning. You'd be surprised at how much stuff you can actually catch. Errors, phrases that just don't ring right, things that you could write better if you just let it sit overnight and reread it and revise it in the morning. Now, a little bit about the editing process. It can be long, it can be laborious, it can be soul-crushing and ego-crushing. You may have to rewrite. Your editor might not like what you did, and you might have to start all over again. But don't get discouraged. Just rewrite it if you have to. And remember, don't fight with your editor, all right? Editors are there to make your stories better, and my experience over all these many years is that they usually do. So take what your editor has to say and take it to heart, and take that information to make your enterprise story better. Now, once the story's all finished, before it runs, tweet out kind of a teaser saying coming X date, right? And say just a little preview of what the story's all about. Then you want to tweet the story at least twice. You may want to do it more than that, tweeting quotes, tweeting various points that are made in the story to really promote your story well. Now, once it comes out, enterprise stories are generally well read, so you're going to get comments at the ends of the stories, and you're going to get emails. Respond to all of them that aren't just nasty. There's no reason to respond to nasty people, but everybody else you should reply to, and think about what they're saying. You may find follow-up stories in what they're saying. And you may think of natural follow-ups too, based on whatever's left over that didn't quite fit into the story. So you need to talk to your editor then about whether there might be a follow-up, all right? So that's basically it, and I'll just end by saying a couple key points. Enterprise stories are really hard. You probably have that impression already, right? Really hard. But they are also very, very fun and really rewarding, so don't be intimidated by them. But remember that the keys to success, the keys to a good enterprise piece are planning and executing the reporting and being willing to rewrite if necessary. Coming to you from my office here in Logan Circle, DC, it's your teacher. I'll show you around real quick. There we are. All right, have a good day, and reach out to me via email or text if you have any questions on this or anything I sent you this morning. All right, have a good one. Bye.